All right, folks. Well, this is Simon Turner, author of Secrets of a River Swimmer, which I have right here. Um, and he's going to discuss a little bit about his book, and then we can talk questions, and got some questions for you guys, and you guys can ask him questions. All right, Simon, you can take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Okay, so I'll just talk briefly about the journey to becoming the author of Secrets of a River Swimmer. We're going to spend too long on it, but it's I think that I was thinking about it. I think there are three parts to my journey to this point. So part one was being lost. Part two, becoming found through my writing, and then the smallest and most recent part, becoming published. So I was thinking about, like, I guess the course of my life to this point, and if there was an Academy Award for being lost, I think I should have won it at some point, or at least been nominated, because I didn't have a game plan for a big part of my life. So my first career move, I studied English at uni, and my first career move is an embarrassing story in hindsight. So I made a list of what I wanted from a job, and basically just that early 20s version of me just had fun, adventure, and not sitting in an office as the key criteria. And I got it in my head that ski instructing would be super fun. But not just ski instructing, but I thought I've got to be an Austrian ski instructor because that's the home of the world's best skiers. And I thought I could say bends the knees and make bends the knees jokes. Anyway, I found out, much to my family's shock, about a course in Austria for international people to rock up and learn how to become an Austrian ski instructor. So it's a 6-week course where you get taught how to pass. There are these exams you've got to pass, practical and written. And I spent every penny I had to get to Austria after university to learn how to become an Austrian ski instructor. And yeah, my family just couldn't believe it. There was so much negativity around the idea. And I rocked up and somehow passed these exams, and then somehow got a job as an Austrian ski instructor in southern Austria. And the poor ski school who had employed me soon noticed that I was only using 3 German words, ja, nein, and Kniebagen. So, and Kniebagen means bends the knees. And so they were a little bit concerned, as rightly so, and they took me off the adult ski school class, put me on the toddlers. It's like a demotion as a ski instructor. And then that was going well because the toddlers didn't want anyone talking to them. But there was a problem with the parents. So they were talking to me when they were dropping the toddlers in at the beginning and picking them up at the end. And I just had the most embarrassing miscommunication stories. You cannot believe the things that I said yeah to, and I had no idea what I'd said yeah to during my time as an Austrian ski instructor. Anyway, it was a fiasco. And I soon realized I had no idea what I was doing. So after a few months of not speaking German while I was doing that, I thought, okay, I'm just going to figure out what I'm doing here. And my English family were living here in Australia at that point, and returned to them, and they were super stressed on my behalf for my lack of career ambition, and had been seeing career advisors on my behalf, and listing out what I might be able to do to earn an income, because they thought that might not happen the way I was going. And it was interesting, but they listed out my strengths at that point, and it was a pretty short list. There was just writing and maths, and they felt that maybe I might get a job in the investment world, because they felt that the investment world might you be able to use those skills. So just to get my family off my back, I wrote this letter to one of the big investment firms. Dear Sir, Madam, I've just back from ski instructing. I have no idea what I'm going to do with my life, but I wondered if you might give me a job 3 days a week so I could explore the investment world. And so I posted this letter knowing full well I'd never hear from these people again. But the weird twist in the tale was they called me in for an urgent interview, this company. And the CEO came in and he said, we've never laughed so hard at an application letter in our entire careers. And then they met me for this interview, and then they offered me a job 3 days a week as per my comical letter. So I sort of ended up in the investment world without a game plan. So I was in there, and at least I had an income, and that was great. My family were a little bit less stressed about that. But I sort of then became a bit adrift. So then I had job opportunities that took me to London. So my family are English, and I was based in London for a decade. And then after that, Scotland for the best part of a decade. And all that through that 2 decades of my life, I was traveling about 3 months a year around Europe and around the US. So for someone who was a bit lost, I became like a global citizen. Like I was like like an Austin Powers type character. I was always in different countries and just felt at home everywhere, but not really at home anywhere. And it was amazing. Like I got to learn so much about the world and different characters, but I still hadn't really figured out what I was doing. And in 2011, I was living in Scotland, in Edinburgh. And my wife is a bit like me. She's always traveled the world, grown up all around the world. And she found out about this castle for sale about an hour outside Edinburgh. And she said, let's go check it out. And we went and visited this castle that was for sale. And like fools, we bought this thing. So then for the best part of the next decade, we were living in a castle, middle of nowhere in the Scottish countryside. And this castle became known as the money pit because every single bit of money we earned to go into repairing it and looking after it. And we were freezing cold. We couldn't warm up in this thing. So around that time, I realized just how lost I was because beyond my relationship with my wife, we were living in the coldest, darkest climate you can imagine. Like it was just wet and dark all the time. We're living in a castle because we were hopeless romantics with this we read too many Jane Austen novels or something. And I was in a job. I was working in Edinburgh thinking I was in the sustainable investment world, but just people who were just focused on money and nothing else. It was quite a negative culture. And all the time I was writing, it was always there in the background. I was always writing different stories. But at that point, it was just a crutch rather than a career move. And one of my closest friends called me around then, a fellow called Matt. And he called me and he said, "You're feeling a bit lost." And Matt used to be a fighter jet pilot in the Air Force. And he was trying to settle down to life as a father and a parent. And he was struggling. He was really struggling. So he said, "Why don't we catch up, you and me, and have more adventures like we used to have?" And we looked at a map. So he was living in northern England and I was living in southern Scotland. And there was this, exactly halfway between us was the River Tweed. And he said, "Let's just meet there. Let's just meet at the River Tweed." And we rocked up with 3 mil wetsuits, which are really summer wetsuits, with the idea we may jump in. And so we got to the river and we put our hands in and we were like, whoa, that is not sensible. That is not a good idea getting in that river. And but then we sort of reasoned ourselves, we sort of talked ourselves into it, put on our wetsuits and just jumped in. And we were shocked by how painful it was. And then we went through the first whitewater rapids and got absolutely destroyed by these rapids because we didn't have anything protecting us. But we kept going, despite the cold and the pain, we kept going. And we started laughing and feeling better after a little bit of time in that cold water. And then we felt amazing, despite being nearly hypothermic. So about half an hour later, we got out of the river and jogged back to our cars. And we made a pact then and there that river swimming was going to be a part of our lives. And that we didn't really understand why, but we said, let's just do this regularly. And we did. So then we met at the Tweed, different parts of the Tweed for the next 8 years, about once a month, including throughout the Scottish winter when it was snowing. So we would still be in the river when it was 40 degrees, I think it's 40 degrees Fahrenheit in the river in our summer wetsuits. So we weren't the sharpest tools in the shed, basically. But everything changed for us through those experiences. Every time we got into the river, we felt uplifted, euphoric, and we had clarity about our lives and the universe on a level that we didn't have before we got in the river. We became incredible friends. Our friendship really became very important to both of us. We met really interesting characters who were somewhat shocked in general that we were in the river. So we met alongside the Tweed. There are these fascinating fishing experts called gillies who take the fishermen and show them where to find the fish, best fish in the river. And the Tweed is famous for having some of the best salmon in the world. So it's quite a big business. And these gillies had just really interesting stories about dealing with the wealthy clients and trying to find the fish. And we became friends, some of the gillies. And we also met fascinating members of the aristocracy. So the Tweed lines some of the wealthiest land in the UK. And a lot of it's owned by various dukes. And one day we were talking with a dog walker who was super friendly. And he said, "This is my property here. Can I give you a tour around?" And we jumped out in our wetsuits, and it was a very funny scene. We were walking around this massive estate. And it turned out he was the Duke of Sutherland, one of the main members of the aristocracy. And he was just a lovely, lovely man who was fascinated by us being river swimmers. So he became the blueprint for Willard in Secrets of a River Swimmer. And another day on a different part of the river, we were swimming along and we saw someone running towards us and it didn't look right. They looked a bit angry. And then we noticed they were holding a rifle, like sort of holding it high and pointing the rifle at us. And so we basically stopped what we were doing. And this very, very angry man threatened to shoot us if we didn't get out of the river because he was concerned we'd be scaring the best salmon away and then upsetting fishermen. So it was like a scene in a very poor Western film. So we sort of put our hands in the air and backed out of the river, slowly walked away. But it's hard to summarize what it did to us, those experiences, but it changed our lives on deep levels. And part two of my story, which is a smaller part, was a few years ago, my wife and I decided to move to Australia. The climate, living in the castle in the cold, dark and wet had proven a bit too much for us. And we discovered we were going to become parents. And we decided we wanted our kids to have more outdoor time when they were growing up. And so I had to part ways with the UK and my river swimming time. And the moment I arrived in Australia, the only thing that I really missed was the river swimming and the Tweed and everything around that. And I could feel it inside me. It started as a missing, and then it evolved into a story in my heart, literally in my heart. And I could feel these characters popping into it and interweaving with the story. Characters who were generally lost, as I'd been, and in different ways, and in need of healing and guidance, and who were attracted to the river for that reason. And I could feel that the story had different layers to it, and that I really wanted to test the boundary between conscious and subconscious, because you're very much on that, surfing that line when you're almost hypothermic. It feels like everything's a bit dreamlike. So without knowing why I was going to write the story, I just sat down and in my spare time, I let it jump onto the page. And it was just super joyful for me as an experience. Like I loved it. And it gave me so much clarity about what the river meant for me and potentially for other people. And the river being not just the river, but nature and maybe even the universe. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. I just absolutely loved it. And at the end, I felt like writing was such a big part of me. That was a really It was a really key lesson from writing that book, despite the fact I've been writing all my life. And I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to get it published at that point because it was such a dear story to my heart. But I thought I'll get professional feedback before I proceed or not proceed. And I sent the book I found out about a very well-respected developmental editor called Katie Zibdell, based in Canada. And I sent the novel to Katie for professional feedback. And she wrote back, and just incredible feedback. She was so emphatically positive on the book. She said it was one of the best books she'd read, definitely one of the best she'd edited. And she just implored me to give it a crack. She said, you owe it to yourself and any readers of the book to get it published. So I thought, why not? Life's short. And I sent the novel off to a few leading indie publishers. Felt like it was a good match for an indie publisher. And was very lucky because I received a great offer from Storyplant and one other publisher in the ensuing few months. And I think I spoke to Lou. I think we spoke and we got on great. And I felt great about the strategy of investing in really good life-affirming fiction. Just felt like a great match. So yeah, that was the second part of my story. And the third and final part is being published. So Secrets of a River Swimmer was published in February this year. So it's a few months ago. And I was a little bit scared. I'll be honest, it was a little bit scary to be published for me because this story was so important to me. And I realized I'd been on Goodreads a number of times in the preceding months, and I'd seen what people say about every single author on Goodreads. And the idea of people judging you in the global, like in the arena of author voices on something that's so important to you it can be a bit scary. But I decided to just work through that. And I've been super lucky on every single level. Like, it's been a joyful experience being the published author of Secrets of a River Swimmer, because the critical reviews have been amazing. I think there's been 3 critics and they've been amazingly positive. The feedback I've had directly from readers and the reviews people have written have been amazing as well. And just people I've sort of talked at a few events and met lots of people, and I just have been very lucky with the type of reader that's attracted to the book. So they tend to be very sort of positive, kind, warm people. So it's been an amazing experience. I've loved it. And it's shown me that this is my first step. I've got many more steps to come. And this is me knowing what I'm doing for the first time in a long time. And my second novel, The Connection Game, coming out, it's February, I believe, Lou, next year. I won't go into depth on that now, but it's a bit like Secrets of a River Swimmer. There are different layers to what's going on there within the context of a psychological thriller based in London. And beyond that, yeah, I'm just going to keep stepping forward. So that's how I got to talking to you lovely folk today. I've taken the windy road to becoming a writer, and I do think that's defined me as a writer. So I've had to run down a lot of rabbit holes that weren't quite right, but those rabbit holes were actually the source of great stories and inspiration and characters. So I do think it's worth, for anyone really, it's worth celebrating what every experience brings you. And yeah, I'm grateful that I took the windy path to get here. That's me.
Thanks for that, Simon. That was great. Does anyone have any immediate questions?
I do want to say that as soon as I finished reading the book, I pulled up Googled a map of Scotland so I could trace the Tweed River. I don't know much about Scotland's geography, but I wanted to see where they were swimming. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little about the villain in the story, which the story obviously has a lot of fantasy elements in it. But the villain, it turned the story from being a kind of a fascinating fantasy to me to something that really started getting my stomach churning and got me very, very like that. So I'm hoping you can talk a little about that, how you came to that evolution in the story.
Yeah, it was interesting. So up until that point, the four main characters are working through their challenges and what brings them to, and ultimately their challenges bring them to the river. And just before Truan, the villain, arrives, they've all united, almost like a family, within the river. And I wanted the reader to almost think, wow, this is all being tied up with a nice boat. Like, this is an amazing, amazing situation. But life is not like that. And I wanted the key characters to have the opportunity to really step towards transcendence. So I didn't feel like they'd all resolved all their issues just by uniting. And I needed a really big challenge to really bring them together and force them to look at what they really needed to address in themselves and their lives. And I don't know where Truan came from. I was writing the novel and he just popped in, and he just seemed to be this wonderful baddie, because he was trying to control everybody's story for his own purposes. And then not only that, but he wanted to kill them, which was not ideal from their perspective. So it allowed Freddie to really sit at the bottom of the river. That was important for me. I wanted him to sit at the bottom of the river and have the little fish really connect with him and talk to him about the key thing for him was he needed to take responsibility for his life, stop trying to save the world. And I really wanted Daphne. Daphne was a very important character to me. I really wanted her to become a heroine, and she needed to be in the river as well, because she had to let go of little Georgie to become the real heroine of her life. And then similar, Willard and Alice had largely dealt with their stuff before, but it was a uniting force, and it felt right when I was writing it. So I was thankful that Truan popped in.
So where did you think the story was going?
So at that point, I knew the previous steps had been a bit more like I'd sort of thought them out, and I knew that there was a big bad challenge coming. So the story was always going in that direction, but the Truan challenge popped in there. Like it was around the music. The music connected me with Truan. I wanted a band who was singing the same music but from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. And then I wanted to connect that. I was like, why would a band be doing that? And then it all sort of went from there. So the music and the river actually led me to Truan rather than the other way around. One of my good friends, John, he's a South African fellow living in Western Australia. He called me just after reading Secrets, and he said, I know who Truan is. He goes, it's the Western Australian government. He said, I've always suspected there was something about him. And he works for the government. He's like, they're bastards.
Wrote the story, did you intend for there to be other characters trying to solve their problems, or did you intend for just like the main character?
Definitely other characters. Yeah. I wanted the river to be way bigger than Freddie. So I wanted it to be in Freddie's head, because you get a really up close and personal feeling when you're in somebody's head that you wouldn't normally participate in, including some of their thought processes. So it was important for me that when he met the other characters, he was scared and wanted to run away, and then had to understand that that was his problem, and their problems were separate. But I definitely wanted the river to unite a group where there was love at the heart of the group, and that they realized that they could support each other, but really it was the river supporting them. So yeah, that was always important.
You have your group who are all supporting each other, but you also have the fantasy element of like the talking fish, the fish who saves Freddie's life at the beginning. Can you talk a little about that? I mean, I found that I'm not a big fan of fantasy, but I really bought into that fish. At times I thought of that movie Big Fish, which really wasn't about a big fish, but that sort of strange, eerie fantasy. And as someone who, I mean, it's sort of, I love eating salmon, but I sort of was very hesitant to eat salmon after reading the book. So
Yeah. So it was really interesting when we were swimming the river, my friend and I. The River Tweed is famous for massive salmon. And there were times where we were swimming and these salmon would jump out of the river that were over a meter long. And you'd be there and you'd be like, it was actually quite an experience watching them jump in the air. And you almost felt like they were looking you directly in the eye. And then they'd jump back in the water. And there's something spiritual about it. Those are clever creatures with amazing abilities. And I wanted to understand more about their world and what was happening beneath the water. And then I also wanted to connect the whole concept of what's going on beneath the water with what's really going on inside somebody and inside Freddie. So it felt like a natural fit for a fantasy element where Freddie was talking to a fish, which when I was writing it, felt like the fish was actually his higher self, his gut instinct, but he didn't realize that. So it was a really fascinating opportunity to introduce somebody to their real self, but without them realizing it. So almost externalizing it. So it just all, that sort of wasn't such a planned element that the fish became such a big character, but he commanded a big role in the novel. And as I was writing the novel, it became clear that the fish was the key for Freddie. So yeah, that was, I love the fish as well. I think about him a lot.
In your mind, was there a connection between Little Fish and Georgie at all? Because there seemed to be implications that way.
Yeah, so
Rescue.
I wanted there to be a little bit of ambiguity in that final scene when they're on the riverbed and Daphne is saying goodbye to Georgie. But from Freddie's perspective, he sees, he's not sure if it's a human or a fish. But that was more about Freddie and him seeing what he needed to see down there.
Yeah.
But Daphne saw what she needed to see, which was little Georgie. So in my mind, I wasn't saying little Georgie was the little fish,
Right.
but they were definitely connected on a level.
Yeah.
And Daphne recognized that earlier in the journey as well. So there was something connecting Freddie and little Georgie that connected Freddie with Willard and Daphne.
Mhm.
In my opinion, there was something bringing them together, and arguably it was love. So it was, but yeah, I that final scene, I had tears running down my eyes, writing that final scene. That was quite an emotional moment for me. But yeah, Daphne had to part ways with little Georgie.
Right.
So that was, yeah.
Absolutely.
One of the booksellers, I did a presentation at a little bookshop near where I live, lovely bookshop run by an amazing woman called Kay. And she said to me, she'd read Secrets and she unfortunately lost a young child when she was a young mum. And she said it became very important to her, that angle of the book. And she thanked me. She said that was perfect, the way. That's exactly what you go through. You've got to part ways at some point.
I've got some discussion questions if anyone doesn't have any immediate questions. All right. So could you relate in any way to Freddie's despair with the modern world and his desire to escape from it? And I feel like anyone can definitely answer this question. No, I can definitely relate to it. Not as much from personal experience, but just in the general like understanding of like the monotonous of like doing work over and over again and like having that kind of, I feel like that's the kind of life that everyone kind of like goes to college for and like expects to have, and for some reason expects to be happy from, as opposed to learning what makes them happy and then doing that. And even though he followed all the steps and he did everything right, it wasn't right for him. And I feel like most of the times the steps are not right for anyone really, because it's not really a one size fits all model.
He was very solitary. I mean, he didn't really have any good personal attachments with anyone until he got, staggered his way into the palace, the castle, whatever it is. I don't know, maybe it's the castle that you lived in that you modeled that on, with the fireplace. That was the only way to stay warm. But yeah, when he first jumped into the river, I mean, I thought, wow, this is gonna be a very short book, actually. But then when the fish rescues him, at first I thought he's dead, and this is some sort of afterlife fantasy, that the fish is actually part of his afterlife, that heaven is his talking salmon. What I think for me, at least, the greatest strength of the book was watching this very depressed. I mean, what else can you call someone who's suicidal, but extremely depressed person who's bathed, who's baptized in the water of this river and is reborn, basically, is what I see as the story arc. But yeah, I mean, he's a disaffected young guy who has no real attachments to pull him out of that despair until a fish pulls him out, and then these wonderful people pull him out.
Simon, what was the what was the decision process that took you from something that has given you a great deal of personal joy, an experience that's given you a great deal of personal joy, and deciding that your protagonist should be on the verge of suicide when he enters the river?
It's an interesting question. So I was trying to figure out a really strong motivation, because I knew that the novel had to be based in the river. And having been the only river swimmer along with my friend in the River Tweed, I know it's not a common situation for someone to find themselves in a freezing cold Scottish river, like not a sane person anyway. And as a result, I was thinking, well, what's his motivation? Why is an otherwise reasonably intelligent human going to end up in the river? And it was actually a comment my friend Matt once shared with me when we were swimming, was he said, it's just such a joy. He said, these are the most joyful experiences of my life, being in the river here with you. And he said, if we were 95 years old and ready to part ways with this world, maybe we could just meet at the river. This is the way I want to do it. So that sort of, I remembered that comment, but I didn't want it to be an old person right at the end of their life. So I thought, well, the only real reason is somebody's just at a point of despair. That's the main motivation I can think of. And so it was to allow the rest of the story to happen, I needed a very, I guess, desperate beginning.
Mm.
And another question. When Freddie immerses himself in the river's cold water, the lines between what he can see and can't see become blurred. Why do you think that's the case? I mean, I definitely think that it adds to the story in terms of the fact that we don't really understand 100% what's real and what's not real. Because I really also thought he was dead. I was like, there's no way. He keeps talking about how how people will die in this river if they're in it for too long. Like, no way he lasts this long. And that was definitely important to the story.
I never got that. I I have to admit, when I started to read the book, it was like, this is a depressed person who's committing suicide. Do I really want to read this? And I'm glad I did, because I think it's a fantastic book. But it never, I never felt like he was ever dead. I always felt like he was slipping between states, so to speak. You know, his realities shifted, and if you wanted to be scientific, you could say it was because of the cold water, but you don't have to. You know, that was one of the joys of the book, is you can just take it, you could take this spiritual experience for what it was, because you don't have to sit there and try to explain it. And so to me, it was fascinating to see where the line would be at any particular time. But that was as really as much as maybe I wanted out of it.
Well, I think it's the distinction between fantasy and magic realism, really. You know, that in a fantasy novel, the fish would have evolved in a completely different way, and his relationship with the fish would have been the central part of the story, and something, you know, something consequential would have come from the fact that this fish was in his life, and that sort of thing. And in a magic realist novel, you know, what we understand and what we don't understand coexist. You know, and I think can be explained away as he's almost hypothermic, or, you know, no, there's a fish that's, you know, that's his guardian, you know, his guardian spirit, and, you know, is there to guide him up to the next level. And I love that about this, that it's just that ambiguous, that the ambiguity is actually a critical part of the whole story.
I think as a reader, I mean, I felt as if, I mean, one of the ways I related to Freddie was that just as the river was carrying him along, I mean, I just jumped into the story and let it carry me along. I didn't, you know, he never questions, why does the river do this? What is the motivation of the river? He just swims along, and all these things happen to him along the way. And that's sort of how I experienced the novel too, which I think was part of that created the empathy between me and Freddie, because we're both kind of flowing along on a current and not really knowing where it's going to take us, or how, whether we're going to survive till the end or what, but we just put our trust into it. But I put my trust into the book and said, well, this is going to carry me wherever it carries me, which was kind of a meta way of looking at it, I guess. Gosh, that sounds too literary, forget it. But I hope you know what I mean. Yeah.
Sounds
That was one of the
great.
things I really liked about it.
Yeah, it was interesting that point you just made. I find that a lot of books have main characters who give the impression they know exactly what they're doing. And I really wanted Secrets to be open. Like, I wanted Freddie to be open with the reader. He had no idea what he was doing, and embrace being lost as a professional on that front. I thought it was quite important. And also to celebrate being lost and trying to figure out how to move beyond that. So yeah, it was actually really joyful to open up with the reader about the character's vulnerabilities and weaknesses, the main character, rather than pretending.
I will add that if he died at the end, I would have killed you, but
yeah.
I wouldn't have allowed it to happen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm interested in this other question. Did you view the river as a character or as a place when you read the book? And what does the river represent to you?
Well, I think the river is definitely a character. There's also elements of place, but I think every river is a character in my book. So that's not surprising, you know. And I think that's one of the things that makes everything work and makes it fun is that you could sit there and decide whether or not this is Freddie's higher self that is actually acting as the river, or is it the river acting as an independent entity? And it doesn't matter which way you want to interpret it, either way works. I think you get it. It has more fantasy elements if you think of the river as a character who's actually bringing something to the story, as opposed to this is Freddie's higher self. And, you know, the whole story is just interacting with the higher self in a way to get myself where I need to go. As a character, it works better because of the other characters in the water and their reactions. Their experiences are just as helpful to them, but obviously the river can't be exactly the same thing it is to Freddie, or it wouldn't work for them.
Definitely.
I didn't see the river as a character. I think that's, Annalise, I think that's a very interesting view. I saw the river more as the plot than a character. The river is what carries the characters from point A to point B to point C, but it doesn't really have a personality that I could see. I did think for a while, I mean, back when I was a teenager, I wrote an essay about Huckleberry Finn, in which the river was a metaphor for safety, and every time Huck Finn and Jim ended up on land, terrible things happened, and then they would escape back to the river. And I sort of was seeing this river in a similar way. To me, it was more of a metaphor than an actual character, because the characters dip into it and then leave it, dip into it and leave it, but it just carries them to the next point in their adventure. So I didn't see the river as actually having its own personality. The fish in the river had personalities, certainly, but it was more like the vehicle that carries the characters through their story. Not that that matters, I mean, but that's sort of how I saw it.
Well, I think the river in a lot of ways represents surrender. I mean, it was, Freddie was genuinely ready to end his life. And he sort of gave himself over to the river, and the river, sort of said, maybe try this instead, and I think, and then, every time he gives himself over to the river takes him someplace, someplace further along on his journey, his emotional journey. To me, yes, I actually agree with both of you, because I think it is a vehicle, but I think it is also, it does have a presence that the river does have, is exerting a force. It's not simply moving him from one place to the next.
But it's also bathing him, washing his soul clean. I also, when I wasn't thinking about Huck Finn, I was thinking about the Talking Heads song, "Take Me to the River." It's just I don't know, Simon, I don't know if you know that song, but pardon me?
It was Al Green. Take Me to the River. I mean, Talking Heads had the big hit.
Isn't it Talking Heads?
Talking Heads had the big hit, but Al Green actually wrote it.
Oh, did he do it also? Oh, I have to hear his version.
Yeah,
Oh,
he actually wrote it.
oh, I did not know that, but everything he sings is just wonderful. But yeah, just the idea that, you put yourself in the water, you put yourself at the water's mercy. The water will do what the water does, but it doesn't have agency. It doesn't have an agenda. It just does what it does, because it is water. It is a river. It washes you, it drowns you, it saves you, it's, you know, it's almost a, you know, it's a moving thing, but it's a neutral thing too. It doesn't hate you, it doesn't love you, it just carries you along. So, yeah.
I have to say, I'm loving hearing that there are different interpretations of that question, because I really wanted people to be able to interpret, because it's really a question of faith, isn't it? And your fundamental beliefs about the universe and maybe religious beliefs. But I didn't want the novel to be prescriptive, saying this is the answer. I wanted people to be able to take what the right answer for them, so that there would be different ways to interpret it. So yeah, for me, that's beautiful, beautiful answers. Thank you.
One of the main questions is, do you believe all 4 main characters achieve transcendence by the end of the book? And what do you think the key differences in their transformations? What were the key differences in the transformation for each of their lives?
Freddie, for sure. I'm not convinced that the others aren't just solidly on their path by the end of the story.
So you're
Do you
saying
think
they don't achieve transcendence, but they're
They're close.
close. Okay.
do you think that if Freddie hadn't made it to the end of the river where he did transcend, do you think that he would have still tried to continue with his original plan of committing suicide if he hadn't made it all the way to the end, if he had only made it like partial of the way?
No. No, that got cured about
I-
halfway through.
Yeah, one of the challenges as the author of a book I discovered is you fall in love with the characters yourself. So I genuinely, as the author, love those 4 characters. And so I can't even imagine killing off Freddie, having been the author. So it's very hard for me to say, yeah, he was going to kill himself when I was writing the story, and I couldn't have gone down that path because I loved him so much. So it felt to me like I didn't want the reader to feel like this was a negative, dark, dead end. I wanted the reader to be aware that we were going from a point of darkness, but this was a journey. So it didn't feel like it was ever going to end for me anyway, for Freddie.
Yeah, I agree with that, Annalisa. I think, but by the time he's in the river for more than a page or so, he's not killing himself. Yeah, and even at the very, very beginning of the novel, the way he reacts to the water, that's not the way somebody reacts to something when they've given up all hope.
Yeah.
You know, I think he didn't know what else to do, and then suddenly he was provided an opportunity to do something else.
Well, I feel like he wasn't as dead set on killing himself as he thought he was, because I feel like he would have done something that was faster, perhaps. And he was more so like drawn to the river, even though it didn't really like say that as much in the beginning. I feel like there was no other path for him to really consider when
Lots
he
of
was
people
deciding.
jump off bridges though, so
Yeah.
of ending their life. So I don't really buy that.
I'm kind of wondering if he wasn't, reacting to the river itself and just like it was fate, and just saying, okay, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to let the river decide.
Yeah, I definitely think that was a huge element. And he definitely did let the river decide, considering how often when he was trying to move to the next steps, he jumped right back in.
For me,
I think by then he is beginning to recognize that the river is his therapy. He jumps into the river after his initial suicide attempt, he's jumping into the river because it revives him. It makes him feel more alive again. And then you realize, at the scene where when Truman, has him tied to the chair and dumps him in the river, and we all think he's going to drown, and he is just fighting for his life. He does not want to die at that point. There is no, not even a shred of suicidal thought left in him. He's going to fight to live. So it's a real turning point for him in a lot of ways.
Exactly. Yeah, because he has the epiphany at that point that he loves the people he's with, like the other people in the team, and he loves his life. For me, one of the key scenes on this front was there's a point around the middle of the novel, and he's talking to the little fish, and the little fish explains to him that by just wanting more time in the river, he's actually a hero. He's actually the hero of his own life because he didn't give up. Like he had the hope in his heart. So it's interesting. That felt important to me as the author, but I don't know if that was a big scene for readers. Did you guys notice that scene?
I did. Yeah. Yeah, I actually like that scene.
Yeah, so that was, but yeah, it was great to have the little fish to bounce what was really going on in Freddie's mind off. So it was a great way to show the evolution of what was happening in deep inside him. So there's quite a big gap from the beginning to the end, as you'd hope. And it felt I was trying to make it incremental rather than just a dramatic change at the end.
I feel like
You
it was a
did
good
job with that.
It was a good subconscious tool, especially because it wasn't as obvious that it was like, while it definitely was like his subconscious talking to him, it wasn't obvious throughout the story exactly what it was. And I feel like that was the best part, especially like the inspirational quotes. I thought that was really nice. And we are hitting 8 o'clock. So does anyone else have any other questions that they want to ask?
Is there a playlist?
River Swimmer playlist.
We're putting an album out next, aren't we, Lou?
For me.
You're the main singer.
Okay. But Barbara is a terrific singer also. So
Okay.
We have done duets, but yeah, no, when you do the audiobook, you can have the music work in.
That's a great idea.
Point. Yeah.
Yeah.
it is actually a really good idea. It's a really good
Okay.
idea.
Especially if people don't know the songs too. Like I'm pretty sure I knew all of them, but that doesn't mean that everyone will. And if they even know what like the song would play behind, because I'm sure it was probably playing in your head when you were writing it, like this is exactly what they were thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you do that? Did you put a playlist together before?
No, for me, it was important to listen to the river on that front. So those songs just felt right for those moments. And the band Frightened Rabbit, is more one of the recurring, I guess, music sources through the novel. And their story, so they're a real band where the lead singer actually did commit suicide, but he was just the best guy. Like, he was a lovely man. And their music is all about singing through vulnerability. So that felt like a wonderful match to the story, because I wanted to celebrate that, I guess, their music and this fellow, and also just how beautiful that is, singing your vulnerabilities away. So that felt like a really cool theme to integrate.
Yeah. Well, and there is the juxtaposition there with, the having referencing a character or a person who actually does choose to kill himself, and juxtaposing that against Freddie's story. I think there was some resonance there.
Oh yeah, definitely. Have to look up Frightened Rabbit now.
Yeah, they're fantastic. The Midnight Organ Fight is the best starting point. Yeah, really good album.
definitely will look that up.
Does anyone have any other questions? All right, well, this was lovely. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you so much, Simon, for talking about your book with us.
Thank you
Very
guys. I've
eye-opening.
really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Beautiful book.
Thanks a lot, Simon.
Beautiful book. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Thank you
time. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care, all.
Have a great rest of your night.
Good night.
See you guys. Bye.